Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to be exploring the concept of hope.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be looking at an excerpt from Don P. Baker's book,
Right.
also titled Hope.
Okay.
Now, this excerpt, it centers around Genesis 39.23,
Okay.
and we're going to unpack its layers of meaning about God's presence, his faithfulness,
Yeah.
and what it really means to be successful, especially when going through tough times,
Mm-hmm.
just like Joseph did.
So one of the things that Baker really points out is that even while Joseph was wrongly imprisoned, he still managed to gain the trust of the warden.
Right?
So much so that the text says the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care.
Wow.
That's a powerful statement about Joseph's character and the impact he had, even in such a restrictive environment.
It really makes you wonder, how did he manage to earn that level of trust in a place like prison?
Well, I think it's important to remember that trust, especially in a challenging environment like prison,
Right.
it isn't just given freely.
Yeah.
It's earned. Right. Joseph, despite being unjustly imprisoned, consistently chose to act with integrity and reliability. And this really highlights that our actions, even when facing adversity, can shape our circumstances and
Right.
open unexpected doors.
I like that idea that our integrity can shape our circumstances.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really struck me about this verse was how it kept emphasizing the Lord was with Joseph.
Right.
It's almost like God's presence turned that prison into a place where Joseph could thrive.
That's right.
You know?
That phrase, the Lord was with Joseph, isn't just a feel-good statement.
Yeah.
It points to God's unwavering commitment to the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph, as their descendant, was a recipient of those promises.
Right.
And God's presence with him, even in prison, was a sign that God was fulfilling his promises.
Yeah.
And this is a powerful reminder for us, too.
Right.
You know, no matter how difficult our situation might seem, we can take comfort in knowing that God is always with us, working within our circumstances.
That's really comforting to think about, especially when things are tough.
Yeah.
But then the verse goes on to say that God gave him success in whatever he did.
Right.
And I have to admit, I was a little stumped.
Yeah.
What did success actually look like for Joseph in prison? He was still, well, imprisoned.
You've hit on a key point
Yeah.
that Baker explores in his book, What Does Success Really Mean?
Right.
We often associate success with worldly achievements, money, status, power.
Right.
But Joseph's story challenges us to look beyond those external markers.
Yeah.
You know, his success wasn't about escaping prison.
Right.
It was about fulfilling God's purpose within those very circumstances.
Okay.
You know, he was faithful, he was trustworthy,
Yeah.
and he used his abilities to make a positive impact even within the confines of prison. That, in God's eyes, is true success.
That's a really powerful way to redefine success.
Yeah.
It's not about where we are or what we have, but about how we live and whether we're aligning our lives with God's purpose. Right.
Exactly. And it makes you think about your own life.
Yeah.
What does God-defined success look like for you in your current situation?
Yeah.
It might not be a glamorous promotion or a financial windfall,
Right.
but it could be about being a faithful parent, a reliable employee,
Yeah.
or a supportive friend.
I really like how Baker shifts our focus from these outward achievements to inward character. He really emphasizes how God's presence can change, not just our situation,
Right.
but our whole outlook.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how can we see God working even when things are tough?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's at the heart of what Baker's trying to convey.
Okay.
The key is to shift our focus from the difficulty itself
Yeah.
to how God might be present in the midst of it.
Okay.
Instead of dwelling on the problem, we can ask, what is God teaching me in this situation? How can I remain faithful even when it's hard?
So it's not about pretending that everything is fine, but about finding God in the middle of it all.
Exactly.
Right.
Faith isn't about denying reality.
Right.
It's about trusting that God is working even when we can't see the full picture.
And that ties in perfectly with how Baker redefines success,
Yeah.
isn't it? He talks about how true success isn't about achieving some grand worldly goal,
Right.
but about being faithful in whatever task God has given us, whether big or small.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether we're managing a household, navigating a career,
Right.
or facing personal challenges, true success lies in bringing faithfulness and integrity to those tasks,
Yeah.
knowing that God is with us every step of the way.
It really makes you think about the importance of those seemingly small,
Yeah.
everyday actions.
Mm,
How can we be more faithful in our daily routines?
yeah.
How can we build trust in our relationships,
Yeah.
even in the smallest interactions?
You're hitting on a really important point.
Yeah.
Those small, seemingly insignificant actions,
Mm.
when done with integrity and faithfulness, can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
They build trust.
Right.
They demonstrate character. And
Yeah.
ultimately, they reflect God's presence in our lives.
You know, it's almost as if Joseph's hardships, his imprisonment, were all part of a bigger plan.
Uh-huh.
It's like God used that time to prepare him for something greater.
That's a very insightful observation.
Yeah.
It brings us to the concept of God's sovereignty.
Okay.
You see, even though Joseph's imprisonment was unjust,
Right.
God was still in control,
Right.
using those difficult circumstances to shape Joseph's character,
Yeah.
to teach him valuable lessons,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately to prepare him for a leadership role that would save countless lives.
It's incredible to think that even when things seem completely unfair, God can still use them for good.
That's the beauty of God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
He can take even the most difficult situations and weave them into his plan.
Right.
And that's a powerful encouragement for us when we face setbacks or delays. Maybe those delays aren't roadblocks, but rather part of God's preparation for something even greater.
Right.
It invites us to ask, what am I learning in this current season of my life?
Yeah.
What is God preparing me for?
Those are great questions to consider.
Yeah.
And while we might not always have the answers right away,
Right.
we can trust that God is working,
Yeah.
even in the midst of our questions and uncertainties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about embracing the journey,
Right.
trusting God's timing,
Yeah.
seeking his purpose in every step.
This conversation has really shifted my perspective on success.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some grand worldly goal,
Right.
but about living each day with faithfulness, integrity, and trust in God, knowing that He is with us, working in and through us.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And it resonates deeply with Joseph's story
Right.
and with this idea of hope that Baker emphasizes throughout his book.
We've uncovered so much wisdom from just one verse in Genesis.
It's truly remarkable how relevant these ancient truths are to our lives today. The same God who was with Joseph is with us.
Right?
He's present in our challenges.
Yeah.
He's working through our circumstances, and he's calling us to lives of faithfulness and integrity, no
Right.
matter where we find ourselves.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because I want to leave our listeners with a thought to ponder.
Okay.
Just as God's presence transformed Joseph's circumstances, it can transform yours. What small, faithful steps can you take today,
Yeah,
knowing that God is with you?
that's great.
We'll continue our exploration of hope in part 2, so be sure to join us then.
Sounds good. One of the things that really struck me as I was reflecting on Joseph's story is how his integrity shines through even in the darkest of circumstances. Like, his character became a beacon of hope
Yeah.
in a place where trust was probably a rare commodity.
You're absolutely right. It's so easy to let our circumstances dictate our actions, to think, well, if everyone else is compromising their values, why shouldn't I?
Right.
But Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that true success, the kind that resonates with God's purpose for our lives,
Yeah.
comes from holding on to our values,
Right.
even when it's difficult, even when it seems like no one is watching.
What's fascinating here is that Baker connects this idea of integrity to the very foundation of trust. He highlights how Joseph's consistent actions, his commitment to doing what was right,
Yeah.
even in the face of adversity,
Yeah.
ultimately paved the way for the warden's trust.
Yeah.
It's like the saying goes, character is what you do when no one is looking.
Right.
And for Joseph, his character became the key that unlocked favor and opportunity,
Yeah.
even within the walls of a prison.
I love how Baker brings in these real-world examples to illustrate these sometimes abstract concepts.
Yeah.
It helps us see how these ancient truths
Right.
can apply to our lives today because, let's be honest, we all face those small, everyday choices
Yeah.
where our character is put to the test.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy to overlook those seemingly insignificant decisions. But as we see with Joseph, they can have a significant impact on how others perceive us
Right.
and the opportunities that come our way.
It's not just about external opportunities either.
Mm-hmm.
Baker emphasizes how cultivating integrity in those small moments shapes us internally.
Okay.
He talks about how it aligns us with God's purpose for our lives,
Right.
regardless of our circumstances.
Yeah.
It's like Joseph's story is whispering to each of us, hey, you might be facing challenges, but don't let them define you.
Right.
Hold on to your values, stay true to who you are,
Yeah.
and trust that God is working through it all.
Okay, that gives me chills. It's so easy to get caught up in the what-ifs and the if-onlys when we're going through tough times.
Yeah.
But Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that even in those seasons of waiting, God is still at work. It makes me think about those times when I've felt stuck, praying for a breakthrough.
Right.
But it seemed like nothing was happening.
You've touched on a universal experience.
Yeah.
Baker reminds us that those moments of waiting, those periods of uncertainty and hardship,
Right.
are often the crucibles where our character is refined.
Okay.
He talks about how it's easy to give up hope,
Yeah.
to become bitter or resentful
Right.
when we feel like our prayers aren't being answered.
Right.
But Joseph's story offers a different perspective.
Okay.
It reminds us that even when we can't see it,
Mm-hmm.
God is still working.
Yeah.
He's using those difficult seasons to deepen our faith,
Right.
to strengthen our resolve,
Right.
and to prepare us for what lies ahead.
So even when it feels like God is silent, we can trust that he's still at work behind the scenes, that he's shaping us, preparing us for something greater.
Yes, and that's where hope comes alive.
Okay.
Baker makes it clear that hope isn't just wishful thinking
Right.
or naive optimism. It's a confident expectation that God is faithful
Mm-hmm.
and that he will fulfill his promises
Right.
in his timing.
Okay.
He uses Joseph's journey to illustrate how those years of hardship, the injustice, the betrayal,
Right.
ultimately refined his character, strengthened his faith, and equipped him to lead with wisdom and compassion when the time came.
Wow.
It reminds us that God can use even the most painful experiences to prepare us for incredible opportunities to serve him and to bless others.
You know, as you're talking about this, I can't help but wonder,
Yeah,
what was going through Joseph's mind during those years in prison?
right.
Did he ever doubt God's presence? Did he ever question God's plan for his life?
That's a question we can only speculate about.
Right.
But Baker reminds us that Joseph, like all of us, probably experienced moments of doubt and discouragement.
Most
He was
likely.
human after all.
Yeah.
But what sets Joseph apart is that even in those moments, he seems to have held on to a deep trust in God's sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
He chose to believe that God was in control.
Or even when things seemed unfair or inexplicable.
That must have taken incredible faith,
Yeah.
especially given his circumstances.
It does.
It's like he understood that his situation, no matter how bleak,
Yeah.
didn't define God's faithfulness or God's power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
speaks to the depth of Joseph's faith.
Yeah.
And Baker emphasizes how this unshakable faith
Right.
is what allowed Joseph to experience hope even in the midst of suffering.
Right.
It's like that verse in Romans that says, nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Yeah.
No matter what we're going through, no matter how we feel, God's love is an anchor that holds us secure.
What a powerful image. God's love as an anchor in the storms of life.
Yeah.
It makes me realize that true hope isn't just about positive thinking
Right.
or ignoring our problems.
Yeah.
It's about grounding ourselves in the unchanging reality of God's love and his faithfulness.
Right.
Even when everything around us feels unstable.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. And Baker invites us to consider how we can cultivate this kind of hope in our own lives.
Yeah.
It's about choosing to focus on God's presence,
Yeah.
even in the midst of our pain or confusion. It's about training our minds to look for evidence of his goodness and to acknowledge his hand at work, even in the most challenging circumstances.
It sounds like a lot of this comes down to perspective.
Mm.
How we choose to view our situation
Yeah.
can drastically impact our experience of it.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
Baker highlights how the same situation can look completely different
Right.
depending on where we're standing, how
Yeah.
we're viewing it.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph could have easily chosen to view his situation from a place of bitterness,
Right.
resentment, or despair,
Right.
but he chose a different perspective.
Okay.
He chose to trust that God had a plan,
Yeah.
even when it didn't make sense.
Right.
And that choice ultimately led him to a place of incredible blessing and influence.
It's a powerful reminder that we have the power to choose our perspective. And in doing so, we choose our reality.
That's right.
If we focus on the negative, on what's wrong or what's unfair,
Yeah.
that's what will consume us. But if we choose to focus on God's faithfulness, his love and his power,
Right.
that's what will shape our experience and fuel our hope.
And that's where hope becomes a transformative force in our lives.
Right.
It's not about ignoring the difficulties or pretending everything is fine.
Right.
It's about choosing to believe that God is good, that he is with us, and that he is working for our good even when we can't see it.
This reminds me of that verse in Proverbs that says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life."
Yeah.
It's like when we hold on to hope, we're choosing to believe in a future where God's promises come to pass,
Right.
where our longings are fulfilled, even if we can't see the path to get there.
And that belief, that confident expectation rooted in God's faithfulness,
Yeah.
is what sustains us through the most difficult seasons. It gives us the strength to keep going when we feel like giving up. It helps us see glimmers of light even when we're surrounded by darkness.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not alone,
Right.
and that God is working behind the scenes,
Yes.
even when we can't perceive it.
I'm so grateful for how this conversation has challenged me to examine my own perspective, to ask myself, am I choosing to see God's hand at work in my life? Am I trusting his promises even when they seem far off? Am I allowing hope to shape my responses to the challenges I face?
These are the questions that Baker encourages us to wrestle with.
Right.
And as we do, I think we'll find that hope is more than just a feeling.
Right.
It's a choice.
Okay.
A conscious decision to believe in God's goodness and to trust in his plan,
Yeah.
even when we don't understand it.
I love how Baker frames hope as a choice, not just a passive emotion.
Yeah.
It's empowering to know that we have agency in cultivating hope,
Right.
even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even though we can't control our circumstances,
Right.
we can control our responses to them.
Right.
We can choose to surrender our anxieties to God,
Yeah.
to trust in his timing, and to cling to the hope that he is working all things together for our good.
This exploration of hope has been incredibly enlightening, and we've only scratched the surface of
Right.
what Joseph's story has to teach us.
You're right.
Yeah.
Joseph's journey is a treasure trove of wisdom and inspiration, and there's still so much to unpack.
Okay. Welcome back to our deep dive into hope, inspired by Joseph's incredible journey, as explored in Don P. Baker's book, Hope.
You know, one of the things that really struck me as I was reflecting on Joseph's story is that it's not just about his individual triumph,
Right.
but it's woven into a much larger narrative.
Yeah.
It's ultimately a story about God's faithfulness to his people.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in the personal narrative,
Right.
but zooming out, we see how Joseph's life was part of God's grand design to save his people from famine.
Right.
It makes you realize that even in our own seemingly small lives,
Yeah.
we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key theme that Baker unpacks in his book, God's sovereignty.
Okay.
Even though Joseph faced betrayal, injustice, and years of imprisonment,
Right?
God was orchestrating events behind the scenes,
Yeah.
using those very circumstances to achieve his ultimate purpose.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is.
Like those times in our own lives when we face challenges that feel insurmountable.
Right.
Maybe a health crisis, a financial setback,
Yeah.
or a relationship falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to get discouraged and wonder where God is in the midst of it all.
You know, it's during those difficult moments that Baker reminds us that God is bigger than our circumstances.
Right.
He can bring beauty from ashes.
Mhm.
He can turn our mourning into dancing.
Yeah.
He can use even our darkest moments for good.
So even when we're in the middle of those dark valleys, feeling lost and alone,
Yeah.
we can hold on to hope,
Yeah.
knowing that God is with us and that
Sure.
he is working for our good.
Absolutely. And that's where faith comes in.
Okay.
Baker reminds us that faith isn't about having all the answers or understanding every detail of God's plan.
Yeah.
It's about trusting him even when we don't understand,
Right.
believing that he has a plan and that he is working all things together for our good.
You know, thinking about Joseph's experiences, it's incredible how those hardships shaped his character
Right.
and ultimately prepared him for the incredible role that he would play.
It is.
Those years of facing injustice and betrayal,
Yeah.
it refined him,
Yeah.
strengthened his faith, and equipped him to lead with wisdom and compassion.
You've touched on a crucial point.
Yeah,
Baker dives into this idea that our trials can actually become opportunities for growth.
right.
He talks about how it's often through our greatest challenges that we discover our deepest strengths and develop those character qualities that God can then use to bless others.
So it's not about pretending our problems don't exist or wishing them away,
Right.
but about surrendering them to God and trusting that he can use them to shape us and mold us into the people he created us to be.
Exactly. It's about embracing the journey,
Yeah.
even the difficult parts, knowing that God is with us every step of the way.
Yeah.
And this is where hope becomes truly transformative.
Okay.
It's not just about enduring our trials, it's about embracing them as opportunities for growth.
Right.
Trusting that God is using them to refine us and prepare us for something greater.
It's incredible to think about the ripple effect of Joseph's faithfulness.
It is.
His decision to honor God, even in the midst of suffering,
Yeah.
ultimately led to the salvation of countless lives, including his own family.
Right.
It makes you realize that our seemingly small choices can have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Baker reminds us that when we align our lives with God's will, we become conduits of his grace and blessing, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. Our faithfulness, integrity, and commitment to honoring God can have a profound impact on others in ways we may never fully comprehend.
It's like that verse in Matthew that says, "Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven."
Yeah.
It's a beautiful reminder that our lives can point others to God,
Yeah.
that our actions can inspire hope and encourage others to seek him.
Joseph's story embodies this beautifully.
It does.
It's a timeless reminder that God can use even the most broken, wounded, or seemingly insignificant individuals to accomplish his extraordinary purposes.
Yeah.
It's a story of hope that transcends time and circumstance, speaking to the deepest longings of the human heart.
As we wrap up this deep dive into hope inspired by the life of Joseph, I want to leave you with this thought. Just as God was with Joseph in his darkest moments, he is with you now. He sees your struggles, he hears your cries, and he is working all things together for your good. Don't give up hope.
Yeah.
Keep trusting him.
Right.
Keep seeking him. And keep believing that he has a beautiful plan for your life, even in the midst of the unknowns.
That's great.